This morning we're joined by Andy Hardy from Nasuni and Garth Niblett from Microsoft Azure and the Azure team there. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how we're helping customers to deliver secure cloud storage infrastructure, particularly focused on the public sector. In terms of agenda items, I'm going to run through a little bit of background into the challenges that we see in most of our customers today. I'm going to hand over to Garth, who's going to run you through a little bit about the Azure proposition when it comes to blob storage and why they're well suited to kind of government framework work. And then Andy Hardy from Nasuni, who's going to walk through their proposition around how to really operationalize that traditional storage infrastructure in a move into the cloud. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some use cases and how we help transition customers from where they are now to where they want to be in the future. So for those of you that don't know us, Nephos Technology is a relatively young company. We've been going for nearly 8 years now. And we exist really to help our customers to transform the way that they store, process, manage, secure their data. It's kind of what we do in a nutshell. Ultimately, what we find is that traditional infrastructure is struggling to cope with the deluge of data that people are having to deal with these days. And actually, as part of that process, you know, it needs a new approach. And that's really what we bring to bear. And we started the business really because actually we found a lot of our customers in previous life weren't getting the value that they should be getting from their partners anymore, and they weren't being challenged to do anything differently, really. So we came to market to, I guess, be that modern-day independent partner to our customers. We focus on data, and we want to deliver some real value and some new ideas to that, a different way of getting to the outcome that you're looking for. We have kind of three core values across that that kind of prop that up, really. We are very data-driven in our approach, and that's in two dynamics, really. So firstly, we, as an independent consulting organisation, we rely on data to inform our decision-making process. And we use that data to really guide us to make sure that we give our customers the right answers when it comes to new technologies. And everything we do is focused on that data, really. The second part of that is actually we don't care about really what the infrastructure model is or what the tin is that things sit on. It's more about the data. How do we help you make better use of that data in a more effective way? We do that independently. And what we mean by independent is that we, whilst we have some key vendors and key partners that we work with, we deliberately didn't try and fill a data center full of our own technology and build our own cloud and all that good stuff. Because ultimately, for our customers, they're looking for someone to help them navigate that change and that transformation. Now, the reality is, if we have a data center full of our own product and our own cloud, that we can't give that level of independent advice to our customers, and that's really key. And the last piece around that is that we're proven. So in our short life so far, in the grand scheme of things, we run last year I think we ran 99% retention on customer base. We have been proven to be able to deliver multi-petabyte, large-scale, complex infrastructure for our customers for some of the world's largest organisations. And that's really been key to what we do. And we do it, as I say, for some very large organisations across the world. It's a bit of a vanity slide, you know, everyone's got one, but ultimately we work with a number of different customers in a number of different vertical markets. But the thing that binds them all together is data. And they all ask the same question: how do we store it? How do we protect it? How do we process our data more effectively? How do we leverage new technology sets to really drive some better value out of what we're doing? And that's really what we're here to do. And data, as we all know, is kind of the lifeblood of any organisation. So, and that's only growing in its importance, right? But traditional infrastructure is really difficult to manage at scale, and it's really hard to cope with the demands that are being placed on it these days. Now, what we see here is that actually the growth rate, and you'll see from the IDC prediction on the screen, in file data in particular is huge. Now, we typically see block workloads, so your virtual infrastructure kind of stay relatively static in terms of sizing, because what's happening is, and no doubt you guys are doing the same thing, that there's a huge move to things like Office 365. So that kind of workplace productivity suite is moving in now. And that used to take up quite a lot of infrastructure on-premise in a virtual environment. But that's changing. But the demands on that infrastructure in terms of processing power are growing. So net-net, it's pretty even. The bulk of growth, however, is in that unstructured file data space. Whether that's because, from a regulatory standpoint, we need to keep our data longer, or whether we're starting to do more with AI and machine learning and those wonderful things that are encouraging us to store more data. There's a number of drivers there, but that's ultimately where the growth comes. The problem is that the traditional way of storing that data is kind of inefficient, right? So in pretty much every customer we walk into, they'll be storing at least 5 times more data than they actually require. And that's typically driven by the use of replication and RAID type technologies that are in place that are really there to overcome this failure, ultimately. And that's a hugely inefficient way of storing file data, particularly when the bulk of the data on those storage environments is unstructured and it's more valuable, so we need to protect it better. Now, the challenge the traditional infrastructure tends to have is one around scale. So you have physical limitations over the amount of disk and the amount of shelves you can put in arrays. And typically you reach a certain point and it requires a forklift upgrade. It's not scalable. And it becomes a costly exercise where you're kind of trying to best guess growth of that infrastructure, which is a real challenge, right? So that's the first thing. And with that duplication, with that replication of data and that scaling challenge comes cost. Cost of management, amount of rack space that you take up in a data center, the amount of people that it takes and man hours that it takes to manage that environment. Because it's not just the storage itself, it's then the backup infrastructure that goes with it. It's then the, tape infrastructure if you're still using tape. All of these component parts that make up the overall solution stack that you would traditionally deploy becomes very, very expensive. That's quite often led to people compromising, right? You will either deploy really expensive SAN infrastructure and put file on it, which is, kind of not the right cost dynamic for file data. File doesn't need typically performance. It really needs scale and durability. And aligned to that is a cost profile. Now, SAN infrastructure is designed for virtual and block environments, really. It has higher IOPS, it has higher performance, and along with that comes a higher cost profile. But people have traditionally compromised to try and get the best of both worlds, to try and minimize the underlying infrastructure and the cost that goes with it. Inversely, people may have gone the other route and deployed NAS services like NetApp, for example, and then put SSD in it and started to use that for virtual environments. Again, that compromise has led to people putting the right data in the wrong place. The cost and performance dynamics is compromised. And that's a real challenge for people, particularly as you grow and you scale. Now, the additional impact of that is really all around that scaling and growth. And one of the reasons why we partner with Microsoft, one of the reasons why we partner with Nasuni is that it gives us an opportunity to really leverage large-scale, low-cost object storage platforms to provide a more consistent experience, a more durable storage infrastructure that's more streamlined to that file workload. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Garth, who is going to talk you through Microsoft Azure's offering in the blob storage space. and a little bit about why the security paradigm within Azure is really important, particularly from a public sector perspective. So I'm just going to hand over control, hopefully. And hopefully, Garth, you should have that.
Yes, thank you very much, Lee. Hi, everyone. My name is Garth Niblock. I'm an Azure applications and infrastructure specialist at Microsoft, and really what my role is helping public sector customers that spans across local, regional government, healthcare, blue light services, and regulatory services understand really what Azure is and what Azure isn't, and what services make sense. And today, really, what I want to take you through is really why trust your data within Azure? How do we ensure availability and durability of the data in Azure? And then really dive into just some of the services that we have available to you, uh, the likes of Azure Blob Storage, which I know Nasuni use quite heavily for their IP that they've built on top. So very, very keen to take you through that. And look, to start off, what Microsoft Azure is a cloud computing platform that features a growing collection of integrated services. This includes analytics platforms, computing, database, mobile, networking, storage, and web services. And look, I think it's fair to say we understand that some organizations are still wary about cloud computing. Keeping data confidential is essential for any organization, especially within the UK public sector. Look, that's why Microsoft has made an industry-leading commitment to the protection and privacy of the data that sits within Azure. Look, we were the first cloud provider recognized by the European Union's data protection authorities for our commitment to the quite rigorous EU privacy laws. And Microsoft was also the first major cloud provider to adopt the new international cloud privacy standard, ISO regarding the use, the transmission. Skip on to the next slide. Sorry, Lee, are you able to move me on to the next slide? And look, this is just to kind of show the countless number of global industry certifications that we hold. Some of them that you'll see in here are very applicable to the UK market, whether that be the UK G Cloud framework, the EU model clauses that I mentioned before, or the IG toolkit within the NHS. Quite an interesting fact for you is that really before we allow any of our services to go into general availability within Azure, they must meet all the compliance standards shown above. So it shows the kind of level of dedication. It's not a case of that we bring them online and then look to apply the compliance after. We lead with that. We lead with compliance. Go to the next slide, please, Lee. And look, for me, Azure really provides you unmatched security. Microsoft invests over $1 billion a year and employs just over 3,500 security experts to protect your information. Look, the real start of this sits within the Azure Foundation, the Azure Foundations, and works from the data center out. The investment that we've put into secure physical infrastructure, biometric security for access to various areas of the data center, and also then the DDoS attack protections that sit within the platform. We've also even built tools to help you secure the environment, identity, and through the likes of Azure Active Directory, networking with the likes of ExpressRoute to give you a dedicated connection, threat protection with the likes of Azure Security Center, or management of the platform through existing investments that may be in SCCM or native cost management tools that allow you to apply governance from the off. And look, finally, just on this slide, Microsoft offers threat protection, which is informed by trillions of signals that we receive every day. I think the stat is from more than 1.2 billion devices we scan, or more than 750 million Azure user account authentications. Look, the volume of data in this is unprecedented, and we provide you with our unique intelligence with threat protection, so you can quickly mitigate against threats. You can move on to the next slide, please, Lee. And I think, look, what's important to understand is we are a, we are a global hyperscale cloud, and I think what's important to define here is what is the region within Azure. The two regions in question, really for the UK public sector, to maintain data within inside the UK, would be UK South and UK West. And look, to define a region really is a set of data centers deployed within a latency-defined perimeter and connected through a dedicated regional low latency network. Look, we have more, as the slide says, we have more global regions than any other cloud provider. But Azure gives customers the flexibility to deploy applications where they need to. Azure is generally available in around 52 regions at the moment, with plans announced for an additional 2 regions. For the UK public sector, as I mentioned, the regions of interest will be UK South and UK West as their region pairs within the UK geography, and I'll come on to explain that in the next slide. So a geography in Azure is really a discrete market, typically containing 2 or more regions, and that preserves data residency and compliance boundaries. Geographies basically allow our customers with specific data residency and compliance needs to keep their data and applications close within the region or within the country that they need to. Geographies are fault tolerant to withstand complete region failure through their connection to our dedicated high capacity networking infrastructure, something I definitely recommend having a search of online. Quite impressive. And as UK and UK West are the primary regions for UK public sector organisations, it's important to note, as I mentioned before, that all data will remain at rest within the UK. As you can see from the slide, redundancy is built from both a geographic and regional level. But look, we don't just stop there. Azure has the ability to protect against the data center outage. Take the example of UK South. The actual region itself is made up of 3 or more data centers, and should one fail, we can maintain services within region using availability zones, as shown on the graphic above, central graphic. With all of this resiliency built into the platform, it basically means Microsoft can offer financially backed 99.9% uptime SLAs when running 2 or more VMs in a separate availability zones within a region. Go to the next slide. The reason that I talk about that, guys, is that is really the foundations of what sits behind the Azure storage services. With regards to the Azure storage services, look, cloud services and cloud usage are broadly defined as existing across infrastructure services, or IaaS, as depicted on the left, and a higher platform services such as platform as a service as on the right. The Azure storage services basically span both of those categories. On the IaaS side, we provide single instance storage for VMs in the form of our disk service and SMB shared storage, which we call Azure Files. On the platform as a service side, we provide an unstructured object store called blob storage. This offers exabyte scale and the ability to store trillions of objects across different tiers within the cloud. To give you an idea of what an exabyte is, an exabyte of storage could contain 50,000 years worth of DVD quality video. Quite impressive. Our current cloud objects storage tiers are hot storage for really high performance and frequently accessed data, and then we have our cool storage for active archives. There are other storage tiers, and I'd recommend reaching out to your Microsoft account team really to understand more if that's applicable. But in addition to unstructured data, we also have NoSQL tables shown on the right hand side for semi-structured and structured data, and then we have the queue service for reliable intra and inter-service communication. Moving on then to the Azure storage durability. Look, Microsoft offers multiple types of storage availability. If we look at the left hand side, locally redundant storage that we can enable. Basically, this holds 3 copies of your data within a single data center. In the event of a single data center disaster, we can then look at zone redundant storage, which I mentioned before, where we can hold 3 copies of your data across 3 zones within the region. For example, if we were using UK South, 1 copy would be held in data center 1, 1 copy would be held in data center 2, and another copy held in data center 3. Look, should you need to protect against region outages, then that's really where globally redundant storage (GRS) is the right service for you. How that works is it keeps 6 copies of your data, 3 within, for example, UK South as the primary region, and then it uses the paired data center to hold another 3 copies. The bigger brother really of GRS is on the farthest right hand side, which is GRS that includes read access to the secondary region to take the reads off the storage service. Look, I think this is quite a wide range, and really understanding your RTOs, your recovery time objectives, and your RPOs, your recovery point objectives, will really help inform you of what storage option is right for you. I think then from really what I wanted to show on the next slide is Microsoft relies heavily on the Azure storage, and we put a lot of trust into the Azure storage level ourselves, whether that's running our consumer-led services with Xbox Live, which I'm a big fan of, whether that's running our own internal IT at Microsoft, or whether that is providing public hyperscale services within Azure, such as the big data services that we provide. These all really rely on the Azure storage, and we use the various levels of durability within the storage ourselves. And then just finally, guys, to finish on kind of the current challenges that we see with on-premise storage. Look, I think Lee did a very good job of explaining where this is today. Look, whether it be limits in terms of the ability to scale to meet the demands of your business, whether it's the risks of managing data in terms of data loss or corruption, or even the associated costs with existing solutions, where you may be paying for capacity that isn't even in use, then the good news is Azure could be the destination for you. Look, that's been a very brief overview from my side, and I'll now hand over to the Nasuni team to give you an overview of their exciting offers that utilize Azure Blob Storage.
Sure does. G'day, can you hear me okay?
I can indeed, Lee.
There you go. So, Lee, I think you're going to arrange for me to be able to click those buttons down the bottom there, so hopefully that'll work. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Andy Hardy. I'm Regional Vice President for Nasuni here in Europe. I'm sitting in Frankfurt this morning on a poor comms link in a hotel room here, so I'm hoping that you can hear me okay. I just want to pick up really from some of what Garth was talking about there, regarding some of the challenges of on-prem storage. Nasuni is for those situations where you can't just lift and shift the whole infrastructure up into the public cloud, and especially when we think about on-premise NAS, group shares, your NetApps, your Isilons, and all the the backup and DR infrastructure, Commvault, etc., that goes with that. There's a reason you have that stuff on-premise to start with, and that's often to do with performance and latency. You need that stuff to be close to people. Really what Nasuni does is try to fill that gap between those two worlds by enabling you to move all of your unstructured file data from any number of sites into the public cloud, and yet have it seem like it's all still local, so that there's no disruption to your business and its processes. We also know, by the way, that public sector has some special challenges. It's a tough environment, really, due to cost pressures, as I think we all know. And I think that Nasuni and Azure combined can have a dramatic effect. We can halve the cost typically of that existing infrastructure, but more than that, we'll be able to dramatically simplify the operations of that infrastructure. The more we get rid of that complexity, the more we'll be able to reduce the demands on staff that are required to manage that infrastructure. And that's also a cost issue, of course. And lastly, of course, in public sector, as Garth touched on, data privacy is really key. And part of what we're able to do is pre-encrypt the data before it even goes into the public cloud with your own keys. So let me give you a bit of information about how we can bring all those things together. And the problem starts, as both Lee and Garth said, with this explosion of unstructured file data. But in particular, if we think of NAS, and I'm talking about group share NAS, you might have different offices in different parts of the country, in different parts of the same town, perhaps, or across a campus. But what's happened is we've deployed lots and lots of separate NAS file storage silos in different environments. We might have some Windows file servers over here in a branch office, some QNAPs over there, some NetApp in the main office, or some EMC, Isilon, etc., etc. In a past life, I was head of Dell storage here in Europe, and I can tell you we've sold huge amounts of that stuff, which people put in their own basements, their own data centers, and are then responsible for how to deal with what happens when it runs out of space, keeping it protected, making secondary copies, and so forth. And this really is a full-time job, because those traditional file services weren't really built for the problems of today. We've seen the dissolving of the central IT monolith. Our services and people are far more distributed now. We have to deliver service across broad geographic areas. And this old-fashioned siloed approach to on-premise file storage, NAS, and as I say, the backup and DR and WAN acceleration, everything that goes with it, is a very expensive approach. It's very rigid. There's no agility to that. With the cloud, we can expand on demand and only pay for what we need, as opposed to with this old infrastructure environment, I'd have to provision my data centers, spend CapEx on buying what I would guess, and probably do some lengthy RFP process might be what we need over the next 5 years, say. And then when I do get it all in, I've got to integrate a number of different technologies to make it work. That means it's complex to manage. Your users get a poor experience because you're forever dealing with quotas and what can I provision for you, and oh, I've got that in the wrong place, I need to move it over there. And look, we've made everything else in this market cloud native. It's really the file infrastructure that's keeping us locked into these expensive on-prem data centers. Nasuni is the solution for getting you out of those and moving everything into the cloud, for example, into Azure. And of course, that is an important objective for people. You are being asked to, why can't we in public sector use the cloud like everyone else does to give us a more flexible infrastructure, only pay for what we need, reduce our CapEx and our operating costs, and just have less complexity and better service, lower business risks in our environment. I think you saw on the slide before that object storage such as Azure Blob has 11 or even 12 nines of durability. I can't even build that in my own data center. So what's stopping us in the public sector from taking advantage of this? As I've been saying, we typically build fairly complex environments. It becomes a full-time, expensive job for us to manage this collection of technologies from whether, the vendor that I used to work for or from someone else. I have to cobble together NAS or standalone file servers of some sort and or put it on SAN arrays. I have to back it up to disk to tape to offsite, maybe replicate to a DR site and do the same in other campus locations or branch offices or remote offices, etc. Each one of those things I have to pay for. I have obviously, whoops, I'm going faster than I wanted to there. I have to be able to integrate them, have an RFP process when they run out of space and buy the next generation, or go in to support lift and shift, as Lee was talking about. What we're able to do with our technology, which I'll explain in a moment, it's called Nasuni, NAS like network attached storage. Uni, it's this universal file system which is unique to object storage in the cloud, such as Azure, is we're able to eliminate that entire infrastructure stack, replace it with some on-premise virtual appliances. These are edge processors. I need very little infrastructure for that. Move all of the capacity into Azure Blob storage. We typically use Azure Cool Blob storage, whether LRS or ZRS or GRS, depending on your preferences for geographic dispersal of the data. And that means that I can eliminate all of that stack of infrastructure around NAS that's going to run out of capacity, the backup windows, the DR recovery, etc. Because the file system that we have uniquely implemented in object storage, this UniFS that Nasuni came to market with 10 years ago, is not only a way for us to store your files, but to store an infinite number of recovery points for those files, which we can present back anywhere in the world, or even in another cloud service. If you're running some analytics, etc., we can present back instantly if you have an issue with the access infrastructure itself. So it is the ability to combine that power of the cloud with that local edge performance that I think we're really famed for, and especially that you want to reduce cost, but also improve that agility and not have to, for example, worry about is the system in one of my old customers, London Borough of Hillingdon, back in the old days at Dell EMC, would have to worry about when is that going to run out of space in that data center? When do I have to buy more shelves? Oh my goodness, I don't have enough room in that facility. I've got to lease another facility. We can eliminate all of that kind of problem by moving the capacity for terabytes and petabytes into the cloud, but delivering the access and the performance, the IOPS at the edge with these edge cache appliances. So I'll give you a high-level understanding of how we deliver this. If you'd like to drill down in the technology, that might require a separate engagement. We'd be happy to work with you. Our friends at Nephos do demonstrations and proof of concepts with this all the time. But essentially what we're doing in a multi-cloud environment, it's very important to our customers to be able to use different regions. Some people like to combine public and private cloud, for example, as well. But by using the cloud-based approach in the way that I've described, first and foremost, we can consolidate all those NAS silos into a single global storage pool and give access to those files at any location. Because of the fact that we keep an infinite number of recovery points natively in the file system, it means that we no longer need a separate point-in-time copy infrastructure. As we already mentioned, there's 11 or 12 nines of durability in Azure Blob Storage, so we know we won't lose the objects. Frankly, you could lose Western Europe, and I think Microsoft Azure would find your objects somewhere in the world, depending on which of their services you were using. And as long as we can see those objects, we can also get back to those past points in time. This is hugely valuable to customers in terms of being able to, for example, mitigate ransomware attacks. If you can instantly go back and present and provide access to files from the point in time immediately prior to when the files were encrypted in a ransomware attack, of course, you just don't pay the rans. We're also able to provide extremely rapid DR. Customers of ours have, at some point lost their local file infrastructure. They might have had a DR copy in the cloud, and it's taken several business days to copy that data back once the on-prem recovery, once the on-prem infrastructure is repaired. However, in our case, we only need to provide visibility to that global file system. It takes a matter of minutes to spin up another one of these VMs, or frankly, you can just redirect users to another one using DFS or DFS namespace or a load balancer or something like that. And so we really do mean that we will eliminate the RTO that you usually have had to suffer with that kind of recovery process from the cloud, at the same time as simply not having to make multiple secondary copies of the data in the first place. We charge you per terabyte per year for the primary data files that you store in there, and there is no extra cost for this DR or point-in-time recoveries. We do some other things with the platform at the same time. Seamless global file sharing, global file locking if you need it, and the ability to leverage cloud analytics services. So we don't have time this morning for a full technical presentation, but I would like to just give you a couple of insights into how we deliver some of this capability. It is, as I say, our solution is the combination of really a few different components. The thing that we patented is the file system, which is implemented in object storage. We call that UniFS, combined with the edge appliances and what we call the Nasuni orchestration center, which is the control plane that lets me manage any number of these environments and orchestrate them so that they all work together. No data goes there. The only data that is transmitted to the cloud is your file data, which has been pre-encrypted with your own encryption keys before it leaves your premises and before it goes into the cloud storage environment. The file system contains that gold copy and all the deltas to that gold copy. And it does also mean, though, that we have no limit on scale. So traditionally we've done our RFP for the next 5 years and said we need 100 terabytes. But what if we're wrong? What if we needed 150, or we've budgeted for 500 terabytes? But what if we're wrong and we needed 700? Well, we just have to at some point go out and procure more. Or conversely, we've overbought. We've spent more money than we needed to. But hey, that was what the RFP said, so that's what we bought. By doing it this way in the cloud, we can not only store more data on demand, you just get billed more for your object storage usage, that's all. You can also have an unlimited number of versions in there at no extra cost. This is really key. Today, you make a secondary copy of all your NAS file data, another copy of it for DR as well, and even more copies of it so that people can work on the same stuff in different locations. I think Lee said earlier something like 5 times more data is stored than is actually needed, and that's why. Overnight, we will eliminate those costs because we store a single gold copy in the cloud, and then we store all the deltas. But the truth, guys, as you probably know, is that most files only make a few deltas, and then they stop making deltas. And that's all we need to store because it's in this durable, robust object storage, Azure blob storage, for example. As I said, we combine it with the local caching appliances. Edge computing, if you care to Google around or read up on Gartner on that, edge computing is becoming increasingly important. Our jobs now is to combine the power of the cloud with access and IOPS delivery at the edge. What we do with our edge appliances is we deliver something which is a plug-and-play equivalent to what you used to have in your NetApp or your Isilon or your Windows file server on-prem. So for your users, for the applications and business tools and workflows that use those file servers today, your group shares, nothing will change. These things serve up CIFS, NFS, SMB, integrate with AD, DFS namespace, Varonis, etc., just like a normal filer would. So it's a very non-disruptive way to migrate away from the on-premise infrastructure with a very lightweight, small amount of cache storage here designed just to handle the deltas that would typically be needed in, say, a week on-premise. So that's kind of the trick combined with the file system in the cloud. And we'd be happy to demonstrate that to you. 98% of reads come from the local appliance because that's the nature of file traffic, which means that you also don't have to pick up all the egress charges that would typically otherwise apply when using, for example, Azure Cool Blob storage. So it's a very cost-efficient way of accessing files everywhere. For those of you that have multiple locations, it's important that instead of having to manage 10 different file systems in 10 different places or whatever it might be, that you can just manage a single file system. We provide the Nasuni management console to make that possible for you. That's part of that elimination of complexity that helps you reduce cost. I've already touched on the orchestration center, and in fact, we have also analytics connectors which let us export data from your file systems to where you might want them for services such as it might be compliance analytics, it might be creating thumbnails from images, it might be scanning images to see who the regular offenders are, for example, in police operations or things of that sort, facial recognition, etc. All of that information, historically, I would have had to have moved from where it's stored on-prem into whichever cloud service I was running those, perhaps it's another site of my own. Whereas we can provide access to that pool of data anywhere and very, very cheaply and efficiently, which means that I can make different decisions about where I store the data. It's important for compliance and security reasons from where I might run such analytics, for example. So when we put all this together, we'll typically halve the cost of that traditional infrastructure. The NAS storage, whoops, I've clicked too many buttons. The NAS storage, the backup, the WAN that joins it all together. Instead, you'll either use ExpressRoute to go straight into Azure or just public internet from the smaller sites, and the data goes direct to the cloud through local breakout. It's a much cheaper approach. I can eliminate the WAN, the backup, and those ongoing expand every few years, end of life, etc., primary NAS costs by using Nasuni together with Azure. And besides those hard cost savings, there's a lot of important soft cost savings as well. Think what it would mean to your business to be able to have RTOs of minutes, SLA like that, everywhere, anywhere, but without all that additional infrastructure cost. A UK business we've recently dealt with was losing a couple of $1 million a year on what it was costing them through their expensive service provider to recover file data to their global locations. Now, you don't have to do all of this at once. A lot of people start with this just for consolidating NAS. We can provide you with additional options so that you, for example, have people collaborate between Manchester, London, and Portsmouth all on the same files at the same time using technologies like global file locking and global file syncing. And then, as I say, people increasingly are starting to look at how they can turn business value out of that file data by moving to analytics as well. We offer different price models for this. What they all have in common is we charge you a single cost per terabyte per year. This runs together with your enterprise agreement from Microsoft, so you'd pay Microsoft for your blob storage through your EA, and you pay Nasuni typically through Nephos for whatever you need. It's a lower cost per terabyte if you just need this at a single site, plus a DDR, we throw that in. If you need it at multiple sites, or if you want to have a premium offering, which also includes multi-site access and file syncing, for example. We've been doing this for 10 years now for thousands of deployments around the world for well over 500 large enterprise and government customers worldwide. We're very excited to work with people as diverse as Coca-Cola, US government details that I can't give you, or they'll shoot me. People that do even more important things like make FIFA football at EA Sports, and people in the oil and gas industry like Schlumberger. So with that, Lee, I'll hand back to you. I hope that that's helpful and of interest to everyone. I really do think that Nasuni can have a considerable impact for you all. Thank you very much for listening. I don't know if I've got control or you've got control, Lee. I don't know what to do, mate. Have you got it?
Hello. Yeah, I'm back. So, thanks for that, Andy. That's great. I'm just going to click through why your slides have kind of clicked through. So
I went the wrong way. I got all click happy with your mouse.
You got all click happy. You did, didn't you? So just to kind of close that off and close the webinar off, really. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we get there. So this is all about how we help customers, and part of Nephos's value add about how we transition customers from where they are now to this new model. And before I go into that in too much detail, I just wanted to highlight something. And I mentioned this earlier, Andy's mentioned it, Garth mentioned it. This concept of kind of right data in the right place rather than compromising. Now, in a lot of environments, what we tend to see is, let's say you've got 100 terabytes worth of storage infrastructure for argument's sake. We have this kind of application and performance workload environment that needs higher performance. And with that, as I said earlier, it comes a higher cost point. So if you were looking at an equivalent cost per gig per month, it would be a higher price point. And that's typically for your virtual and your performance workloads. But the bulk of that infrastructure is typically file. Now, when we look at that file estate, and this is one of the reasons why the Nasuni proposition twinned with objects is so appealing, and one of the reasons why we're able to reduce costs so dramatically, is that when we look at that kind of big iron that you may used to have deployed on site, typically anywhere between 10 to 40%, depending on the environment, and more commonly that's 10 to 20%, of the file data being stored is hot. So to Andy's point earlier, where he was saying that 98% of the data served is from the local cache or from the local appliance, this is where you need the performance. You only need it on that 10, 20, 30% of hot data, at which point you have a slightly different cost profile. But the appeal with the Nasuni model is that actually we're able to, by leveraging things like Azure Blob, we're able to push all of that data into the cloud. So we have our gold copy there, if you like, which means actually we have a much lower cost point for all of this kind of unstructured archive data, for want of a better way of calling it, that's not really used frequently. Now, because it's not used frequently, we don't need to put that on really expensive spinning disk on site. By leveraging Nasuni and their file system, what we're able to do is still provide access to that data, even though it lives in the cloud, but without having to replicate and duplicate that data on premise, and without putting it on some really expensive stuff. And that's really one of the key economic drivers to doing this. It's simplifying that operational model on premise. It's reducing the cost of doing so, and it's reducing the physical footprint at the same time. And instead of having some really expensive NAS devices there, we're able to do that all on either virtual machines or what are, in effect, x86-based appliances, black box appliances, which is great. Now, the challenge for most customers is how do you get there, right? This is relatively new technology, relatively different approach to delivering the same outcome. So what we've done as a business over time is we've developed a number of services that help our customers transition from where they are now to where they want to be. We call them our smart services. In particular relation to this, we do a lot of work around our smart file assessment and our smart object service, which are all about one, getting an understanding of the profile of the data that you currently store, because realistically, it's a bit like when you move house. If you're moving from something old to something new, you don't want to take the old rubbish with you. So this is a really good opportunity to clean house, and it's a really good opportunity to better align things like data retention policy on what you're doing, because quite often we'll see that the data retention for the environment, there may well be a policy against it, but when you compare that to the actual workflow and what people are actually doing with it, it doesn't always align. So through this, what we're able to do is, through a pretty painless unstructured data audit, is give you a view of what your data estate looks like, how that maps out against things like retention policy, give you a cleanup strategy against that, and a data management strategy, and then we give you a roadmap to kind of move to the Nasuni model with it. Now, that service is actually approved under G-Cloud 11, so we are that is available through the G-Cloud portal, and it gives quite a lot of benefit. Now, this I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but ultimately, this is the pathway that we take when we do this, right? So we begin by profiling the data, we analyze it off-site, we'll then develop the strategy and the roadmap, we'll look at the TCO, we'll actually do the work for you in terms of understanding what your current cost base is and then mapping that towards what it could be in a new model, and identifying the areas of kind of, I guess, legacy technology debt that you can remove, along with the design and the delivery approach for that. And that's all part of the process as we move it forward. And this is what's been approved under the G-Cloud framework. To put it into context, what you see now is an example. This is actually from a financial services organization. But to be honest with you, the cost saving aspect that you see on the screen is pretty common across every single market. You know, your vertical aside, you know, the sector in which you work aside, most people have the same challenges over that kind of inefficiency over storage. Now, for this particular customer, we went through that process. We went through that smart object, smart file assessment process. And what we were able to do was, in effect, take back up, for example, into an object here. We were able to reduce the footprint of the block storage environment and move that onto a hyper-converged platform for them. And what we were also able to do as part of that was to actually remove the need for one of their data centers in its entirety by leveraging the cloud as a DR location. What we were then able to do is move the file data from the really significantly more expensive block infrastructure and leverage the power of that object store to really drive scale and lower cost per unit in that space. Ultimately, we drove the cost down by 47% over 3 years. Now, we have a number of examples of this that we could give, and that's really a lot of the value in what we do as a partner, is to help you kind of work out whether it's the right answer for you. To recap slightly before we close off, some of the key benefits. So what does the approach give you? Well, it gives you the capability to put the right data in the right place. It gives you operational gains in that sense. It's less to manage in remote offices, in remote sites. It's less to manage in terms of the overall complex architecture that Andy discussed earlier. You know, all those different point products that make up the overall solution. This gives us the ability to scale and consolidate those tool sets. And in the process, we'll also reduce the cost of doing so. Now, that's all kind of your tangible cost-driven aspect. There are a lot of soft benefits as well, like collaboration, like the ability to scale on demand. So that kind of agility and the ability to scale out outside of the commercial benefit are what also drives a lot of customers to take this approach. If you think of use cases where you're trying to share data across multiple locations, for example, that collaboration piece becomes really, really powerful. So that kind of concludes this morning.